Welcome to the all-new Hoop Nova, your ultimate source for everything basketball.
They was having team meetings about Zion and getting his stuff together and his work ethic. When you're the #1 pick, pressure comes with that.
When I'm on the court, there are times where I'll get subbed out. Do I have to come out the game right now? There are times where I'm like, I really don't want to come out the game because I don't feel tired and it just feels good to be on the court.
There may not be a more confusing superstar in today's NBA than Zion Williamson. Because whenever Zion actually steps onto the court, he looks unstoppable. Think about it for a second. A player standing around 6'7" and weighing nearly 280 pounds shouldn't be able to move the way he does. He attacks the rim like a freight train, finishes through multiple defenders, and scores with an efficiency that most centers would envy. Even in seasons filled with injuries and interruptions, he's still capable of averaging over 20 points per game while shooting around 60% from the field. That's not normal. Defenders know exactly what he's going to do, yet they still can't stop it. In fact, Zion draws contact at one of the highest rates in the league. Opponents often have only two choices: either let him score or foul him before he gets to the basket. Talent has never been the problem. The real problem is that nobody knows if Zion can stay healthy long enough to become the player everyone once believed he would be, and that's what makes this story so heartbreaking. Coming out of June, Zion wasn't just another highly rated prospect. He was viewed as a generational talent. The hype surrounding him was unbelievable. Fans were comparing him to legends before he had even played a single NBA game. Some saw shades of LeBron James, while others believed he had the power and dominance of Charles Barkley. When the New Orleans Pelicans won the first overall pick in 2019, it felt like the franchise had secured its future for the next decade and beyond. Everything seemed perfect, but almost immediately, things started going wrong. During his rookie season, Zion suffered a knee injury that required surgery, limiting him to only a small number of games. At first, nobody panicked. Young players get injured all the time, and many eventually recover. Then came his second season. For the first time, basketball fans got a glimpse of what Zion could become. He played at an all-star level, averaging incredible numbers and looking nearly impossible to guard. The league finally saw why scouts had been so excited about him. People thought the injury concerns were behind him. Unfortunately, they weren't. The following season turned into a nightmare. A foot injury forced Zion to miss the entire year. Not half the season, not a few months, the entire season. Just when fans started believing again, another setback arrived. Then came hamstring problems, then more lower body injuries. Every time it looked like Zion was finally building momentum, something happened. One of the most painful moments of his career came during the play-in tournament. Zion delivered one of the best performances of his life, scoring 40 points and completely taking over the game. For a moment, it felt like his superstar breakthrough had finally arrived. Then he got injured again. That single game perfectly summarizes Zion Williamson's career. Brilliant one moment, unavailable the next. And the worst part is that this cycle keeps repeating itself every off-season. Reports begin to surface. Zion is in incredible shape. Zion has lost weight. This is the best condition of his career. Fans become excited again. Analysts start predicting a massive season. Expectations rise. Then a few months later, his name appears on the injury report, once more to this point. Many fans have become numb to it. The conversation surrounding Zion has changed completely. Instead of discussing MVP potential or championship aspirations, people now ask a much simpler question: can he stay healthy? Because when he's available, he's clearly one of the most dominant interior scorers in basketball. But availability matters. The NBA is filled with talented players. Superstars are remembered not only for what they can do, but also for how often they can do it. Unfortunately, Zion's injuries have prevented him from building consistency. This situation becomes even more complicated when you consider his contract. Teams around the league understand how gifted he is, but they also understand the risk involved. Investing heavily in a player who has struggled to stay on the floor year after year is a massive gamble. That's why Zion's future feels so uncertain. The Pelicans themselves seem stuck between two difficult choices. They continue, believing in his potential and hope that everything finally comes together? Or do they accept reality and move in a different direction? Neither option is easy, because giving up on a talent like Zion feels almost impossible.
players with his combination of size, explosiveness, touch around the rim, and scoring efficiency simply do not exist very
often, but continuing to wait also carries risks. Every season that passes without consistent health is another year of unanswered
questions, and that's what makes Zion
Williamson one of the biggest what-if stories in modern
basketball. The talent is real, the numbers are real, the dominance is real, but so are the injuries. If Zion can somehow stay healthy for multiple seasons,
he still has enough ability to become one of the faces of the NBA. However, if these injury problems continue, basketball fans may eventually look back at his career with disappointment, wondering what could have been. Because sometimes the greatest tragedy in sports isn't a lack of talent, it's having all the talent in the world and never getting the opportunity to fully show it.
Chuck, you had a visceral reaction to this.
It looked like me and Shaq had a baby.
Another major concern surrounding Zion Williamson has always been his physical condition. For years, reporters and fans have followed every update about his weight almost like they were tracking stock prices. One off-season, headlines claim he's slimmer than ever.
A few months later, new reports suggest he's gained weight again. The reason this matters so much is simple. Zion's entire game depends on explosiveness. He's not a player who relies purely on jump shooting or finesse. His greatest weapon is his ability to overpower defenders with speed, strength, and athleticism.
Every violent jump, every hard landing, and every aggressive drive to the basket places enormous stress on his knees,
ankles, and hamstrings. And when you're carrying that much weight, even a small increase can make a huge difference over an 80 game
season. Basketball history has shown us how
dangerous this path can become. NBA fans have seen several
superstars whose careers were changed forever because their bodies simply couldn't keep up. Derrick Rose was once considered one of the brightest young stars in the league before injuries robbed him of his incredible athleticism. Brandon Roy looked destined for greatness, but knee problems cut his prime short. Greg Oden entered the NBA with massive expectations, yet persistent injuries prevented him from ever reaching his potential. Nobody can say with
certainty that Zion will follow the same path, but history certainly doesn't provide much comfort. Then there's the financial side of the situation. Back in 2022,
Zion signed a massive 5-year contract worth nearly $200 million. Over the next 2 seasons alone, he is scheduled to earn close to $87 million. That's superstar money for any franchise.
Committing that kind of salary means dedicating a huge portion of the team's payroll to one player.
Normally, organizations only make that investment when they fully trust the player's long-term health and availability. The
Pelicans clearly had concerns. That's why Zion's
contract contains unusual protections and conditions. Certain portions of the deal are tied to factors such as games played, weight requirements, and body composition standards. Those types of clauses are extremely rare for a player receiving a maximum contract. In many ways, it showed that New Orleans already understood the risks years ago, and unfortunately,
many of those fears eventually became reality. What's even more unfortunate is that Zion potentially lost out on even more money because of his injuries. Had he remained healthy and earned all NBA honors, his contract could have increased significantly. But injuries prevented him from reaching those milestones. This brings us to the biggest question. Why doesn't New Orleans simply trade him? The answer isn't as simple as people think. Imagine you're the general manager of another team. On one hand, you're looking at a player with generational talent. When healthy, Zion can dominate games and completely change a franchise's future. On the other hand, you're also looking at a player who has struggled to stay on the court for most of his career while carrying an enormous
contract. Would you be willing to risk valuable draft picks and
young players for that uncertainty? That's the dilemma. Zion's incredible talent makes him too valuable to
completely give up on, but his injury history makes him too risky to fully invest in, and that leaves both Zion Williamson and the New
Orleans Pelicans stuck in one of the most difficult
situations in the entire NBA. At first, many people believed Zion Williamson himself was the biggest problem in New Orleans. But the deeper you look into the situation, the more you realize something even more concerning. The Pelicans might be an even bigger mess than Zion's injury history, because for years now,
this franchise has struggled to establish any clear direction. After another disappointing season, New Orleans once again found itself searching for answers.
The team finished near the bottom of the standings and looked completely disconnected on both ends of the floor, and when organizations start losing, instability usually follows. The coaching situation alone tells you everything you need to know. The Pelicans initially decided to stay committed to their coaching staff,
only to reverse course shortly afterward.
Interim coaches, constant changes, and new systems became the norm.
Eventually, another new head coach entered the picture,
making him yet another coach in Zion Williamson's relatively short NBA career. Think about that for a moment. Zion is still only in his mid-20s.
Yet he has already played under multiple head coaches. For any young superstar, constant changes in leadership can be damaging. Different systems, different philosophies,
and different expectations make it almost impossible to build continuity, and unfortunately, the roster construction hasn't been much better. This off-season, New Orleans had several obvious weaknesses that needed immediate attention. One of the biggest concerns was the center position. The team desperately needed size, rim protection, and defensive stability.
There were opportunities available across the market,
and the Pelicans had enough flexibility to make meaningful improvements, but instead of making major moves,
they largely stood still. As other teams strengthened their rosters, New Orleans once again left fans wondering what exactly the long-term vision was. And then we get to perhaps the most confusing decision of all.
The roster fit around Zion Williamson, because if you're building around Zion,
one thing should be obvious. You need spacing. You need shooters. You need players who can open the floor and allow him to attack the basket. Zion is at his best when the paint is clear and defenders have no choice but to face him one-on-one. Instead,
New Orleans continues to place him alongside players who operate in many of the same areas of the floor. The result? A crowded offense that often makes life harder for its own superstar. The addition of another young frontcourt player only raised more questions, while the player himself may have tremendous potential. The fit remains questionable. Both players prefer operating near the basket.
Neither is known primarily for elite three-point shooting or dominant rim protection defensively.
This combination creates significant concerns. Offensively, it limits spacing. It's almost as if the Pelicans selected talent without fully considering how the pieces would work together. And then there's the draft capital situation. In an effort to improve the roster, New Orleans made aggressive moves involving future assets. The problem is that these decisions only make sense if you truly believe your team is ready to compete. But looking at the roster, many people around the league never shared that optimism. As the season unfolded, those concerns became reality. The Pelicans struggled badly. Instead of fighting for player positioning, they found themselves near the bottom of the standings once again. That made the value of those future assets even more painful, because when a struggling team gives away valuable draft picks, every loss becomes even more expensive. Meanwhile,
other organizations benefited from New Orleans' mistakes, and that's what makes the entire situation feel so frustrating for Pelicans fans. This team desperately needs young talent, depth, and a clear identity, yet several of their decisions seem to push them further away from solving those problems. The numbers only made matters worse. New Orleans finished near the bottom of the NBA in three-point volume and offensive spacing metrics. In today's NBA, spacing is everything. Championship teams surround their stars with shooters and versatile defenders. The Pelicans have struggled to do either consistently, and unfortunately, Zion may be the player most affected by these issues because his game depends heavily on driving lanes. Every extra defender standing in the paint
makes his job significantly harder. Instead
of maximizing his strengths, the current roster often minimizes them, which brings us to the biggest question of all. What exactly is the plan? Are the Pelicans trying to contend? Are they rebuilding? Are they attempting to stay competitive while preparing for the future? Honestly, nobody seems to know. Trade rumors involving Zion have circulated for years.
Every few months, another team is mentioned as a possible destination, yet nothing ever
happens. The reason is simple. Zion's talent is undeniable, but his health concerns dramatically lower his trade value. No team wants to gamble massive assets on a player with such an uncertain medical history. At the same time, New Orleans cannot easily justify giving up on a player with superstar potential. As both sides remain stuck. Even more confusing are reports suggesting that some of the team's healthier
and more reliable players could become trade candidates. That creates an even stranger situation, because
It sends mixed messages about the franchise's direction if you're rebuilding.
Commit to rebuilding if you're trying to win. Build properly around your star. The Pelicans seem trapped somewhere in the middle. Not bad enough to fully reset. Not good enough to seriously compete. And in the NBA,
Being stuck in the middle is often the worst place a franchise can be right now.
Zion Williamson's future remains uncertain, but perhaps the bigger question is this. Can the New Orleans Pelicans figure out their own future before they completely waste the talent of one of the most gifted players of this generation?
The biggest problem for the New Orleans Pelicans is that they're stuck in the worst possible position an NBA team can be in. They're not bad enough to completely rebuild, but they're also not good enough to seriously compete. And the reason for that is Zion Williamson, when Zion is healthy.
This team has too much talent to intentionally lose games.
A fully healthy Zion is still one of the most dominant players in basketball.
At only 25 years old, he has the ability to completely change the direction of a franchise. But the issue is simple. He's rarely available because of that.
New Orleans keeps finding itself trapped in basketball limbo.
Every season begins with hope, excitement, and big expectations. Then injuries hit. The team falls in the standings, and the same questions return all over again. To Zion's credit,
He has repeatedly said the right things publicly. He has talked about improving his conditioning,
taking better care of his body, and making adjustments to his game moving forward. Maybe he truly means it. Maybe this off-season will finally be different. But NBA fans have heard similar stories before. Every summer brings reports that Zion is in incredible shape.
every year. Optimism returns, and every year,
Injuries seem to follow. That is why so many people remain skeptical. Personally,
I don't believe Zion Williamson is finished. Far from it. The talent is simply too special to ignore when healthy.
he still looks like a top 15 player in the league, and on certain nights,
He even looks like a top 10 talent. Few players possess his combination of power.
explosiveness, and efficiency around them. The problem has never been basketball. Ability, the real issue is everything.
Surrounding that talent, it's the injuries that continue to interrupt his progress. It's the enormous
Contract that makes teams nervous.
about trading for him, and it's the unstable environment in New Orleans, where coaching changes and questionable front office decisions have created uncertainty year after year. All of these problems are
Happening at the same time. That's why Zion's future feels so concerning. Not
because he can't play, but because nobody
knows if he'll be able to stay on the court long enough to reach his potential. For me, next season feels like the turning point. It could define the rest of his career. If Zion returns,
stays healthy, and plays around 65 or more games,
everything changes. The narrative surrounding him immediately improves. His value rises, and New Orleans suddenly becomes relevant again. But if injuries strike once more,
difficult decisions will have to be made. There is already speculation that the Pelicans may eventually move in another direction.
some people believe recent roster moves suggest that the organization is preparing for a future that doesn't fully revolve around Zion anymore. At the same time, trading him right now would be incredibly difficult. His value simply isn't as high as it once was. Teams still love the talent, but they fear the risk, and that leaves New Orleans with very little leverage. There have also been rumors over the years that Zion has never been completely happy with the situation in New Orleans.
Whether those reports are true or not, continued losing could eventually create even more uncertainty regarding his long-term future. My prediction? This season will probably be relatively quiet, but if things go wrong again, next off-season could become extremely interesting. Trade discussions will grow louder, frustration will increase, and questions about Zion Williamson's future will dominate NBA headlines once again, because at this point, everyone is asking the same question. Will Zion finally become the superstar everyone expected him to be? Or will he become one of basketball's biggest what-if stories? Only time will give us that answer.